When we left him, the fisherman was watching a column of smoke the size of the sky decide what it wanted to be. It decided. It came down out of the clouds, not drifting, gathering, and it stood up on the shore, 2 legs of smoke, 2 arms you could hang a house from, and a face. The face was not friendly. That's roughly where I stopped, the first night when the sun came up, and the next evening the king came back. I want you to sit with that for a second. A man who had not been curious about a single thing in 7 years walked the whole length of that palace a second time and sat down and waited for a fisherman. I lit the lamp and I picked the story up exactly where I dropped it. Now, you'd think a creature sealed in a jar for longer than there have been cities, finally let out into the air, the first word out of it would be thank you. It was not thank you. The genie looked down at the small wet man who had freed him and informed him very politely that he was about to be killed, and that, as a courtesy, the fisherman could choose how. Here was the genie's reasoning, and I'll admit it has a certain terrible logic. The first 100 years in that jar, he swore he'd make whoever freed him rich beyond counting. Nobody came. The second 100 years, he swore he'd lay all the treasures of the earth at their feet. Nobody came. By the third 100 years, he'd have settled for someone to talk to. Nobody came. And somewhere in the 4th century, or the 5th or the 10th, a thing happens to a mind left alone too long. The gratitude curdles. He made one last vow. Whoever finally opened this jar for the crime of making him wait, he would end. And then, of course, the fisherman opened the jar. The fisherman was old and poor and about to be ended by a mountain with opinions. He had no sword, he had no magic, he had a net full of holes and one thing more. The same thing I have. The same thing that is at this exact moment keeping me alive in a room with the king. He could talk. So he looked up at the creature that filled the sky, and he did not beg. He frowned, he said, "I don't believe you." "You," he said, "you came out of that." And he pointed at the jar, which came up to his knee. A single toe of you wouldn't fit in that jar. I've fished this shore my whole life, and I've never heard such a story. You're a spirit. Spirits are smoke and lies. You were never in there at all. Now, there is a weakness that every large and powerful thing shares. It cannot stand to be doubted. The genie did not argue. Arguing was beneath him. He would simply prove it. He came apart, down out of the sky, thinning, darkening, a whole river of smoke running the wrong way, pouring down and in, until the last curl of him vanished through the neck of the jar with a sound like a long sigh. And a wet old fisherman, moving faster than he had moved in 30 years, slammed the lead seal back into the mouth. The jar jumped in his hands, it rocked. From inside came a voice, and the voice was no longer polite. The fisherman sat down on it. "You had 300 years," he said, "to plan something better than that." Here's the part the story usually skips, and I won't, because it's the part that matters. He didn't throw it back into the sea. He wanted to. He walked to the water's edge with it and stood there a long time. But he was a poor man with 4 people at home, and a jar thrown into the sea feeds nobody. So he made a bargain. I know something about those. He would open the jar one more time if the genie swore on the name stamped in the lead on Solomon himself to do him no harm. And a thing that has been alone for 1,000 years will promise a great deal to be let out again. But a promise made on that name cannot be broken. The genie swore. The fisherman broke the seal. What came out this time was quieter. The genie kept his word. That's the real surprise of the story, and it's a better surprise than the smoke. He told the fisherman to take up his net and follow. And he led him over a hill the fisherman had walked past every day of his life without once walking over. On the other side of it was a lake. No river fed that lake. No river left it. It simply sat there between four hills, still as glass, where no lake had any business being. "Cast your net here," the genie said, "once a day, never more than once." And then he was gone, into the ground or the air, the fisherman couldn't say. He cast his net into the strange still water, and he pulled up 4 fish, one white, one red, one blue, one yellow. 50 years on that coast, and he had never seen a white fish or a red one, and he had certainly never seen 4 come up in 4 colors, as if someone had chosen them. They looked at him. I want to be precise about this, because it's where tomorrow lives. The fish looked at him, the way a person looks at you when they want to say something and can't. And then the sun came up. I closed my mouth. The king hadn't moved in an hour, but something had shifted since the first night. The first night, he'd watch me like a man watching a fire he expected to go out. Tonight he watched like a man who had forgotten he was tired. And then the king of the grey city, who had not spoken one word to me in 2 nights, who by his own law was not supposed to want a story at all, said one word. He said, "Fish?" And my sister, from the doorway on cue, the way we'd practiced, "Sister, what did the fish want to say?" And I looked at the king, who had just, without meaning to, asked me the very same thing. And I told him the truth, that I didn't know whether I'd be allowed to tell him tomorrow. He stood up, he walked to the door. And this is the whole of what changed on the second night. This time he stopped. He didn't turn around. He didn't say anything else. He just stopped for the length of one breath, like a man looking for a law that would let him ask. Then he was gone. And on the arm of that grey throne, where one thread of gold had been, there were 2. 2 nights down. 999 to go.